All right, I'm going to read some more Kentucky history. Page 367, New History Kentucky, Clotter, Harrison, 1997 edition. Okay, so between 1950 and 1965, mechanization caused the number of employees in Kentucky's underground mines to fall by 70%. So between 50 to 65, so during the 50s and a little bit in the 60s, the number of employees in Kentucky's underground mines fell by 70%. That's almost all of them. Perry County just fired another 500 miners just recently, 2012. So the average amount of coal mined per person per day had gone from 4.75 tons to 14 tons. So actually the output per person is increasing. But since the mechanization is making one person be able to have a greater output, then that means there's less need for more workers, more working people. So they're firing people in the 50s. Many young displaced miners could find no other jobs in the area. Harlan County lost 20,000 people during the 1950s, and across the coal fields, massive migrations took place. From the 1940s into the 1980s, unions, both on the coal fields and in other areas of Kentucky, played an important role, not just in economic matters, but in political matters as well. Union endorsements meant votes, and labor lobbies had a major influence on legislatures. So despite a strong start, however, Kentucky ranked 13th nationally in union membership in 1939. In 1939, Kentucky was the 13th highest state in the Union in the United States for union membership. Then the state soon settled into the middle ranks. It did have more strikes than the American norm in the 3 decades after 1952, and a relatively high percentage of labor union members than the rest of the South. Overall, however, Kentucky only had an average amount of union activities. By the early 1980s, less than 20% of the manufacturing plants in the state were unionized. Less than 20%. Reflecting national trends, the numbers continued to drop after that. With less cohesion, influence, and control, unions became far less important in political races, and by the last part of the 20th century, the golden age of unions appeared to be over. So this is 1980s. He's talking about 20%. This is 97 when it was written, and now it's 15 years later. So 15 years, unions are at about 8%, 8 or 9%. With a slight variation depending on public or private sector. More women are in unions than men, but overall it's 8% of the population that are part of a union. So there's no workers' councils, no working people getting together saying we could do something better. Also on page 367, we talk about Happy Chandler. I don't know if you know anything about Happy Chandler, but he's like a big figure in Kentucky politics. Happy Chandler, right? He's so happy. He came out strong against the coal companies when he first burst out onto the scene. He was a newcomer. And it almost seemed like he burst onto the Kentucky scene almost overnight. Albert Benjamin Happy Chandler, who was born in 1898, and he died in 1991. So he's been dead for 11 years. And he died at an old man too. So he was 93 years old. Happy Chandler, Albert Benjamin Chandler. He was a state senator, lieutenant governor, and governor, all by the age of 37. He would go on to become one of the dominant Kentucky political figures of his era, serving later as U.S. senator, again as governor, as baseball commissioner, and as a faction leader in the Democratic Party. I was reading Ashley Judd's memoir. I think something about Ashley Judd. I got her memoir, but I'm not sure exactly if it came out, All That's Bitter and Sweet. But she had talked about protesting, Ashley Judd was part of a protest at the University of Kentucky against Happy Chandler, Albert Benjamin Chandler. So Albert Benjamin Chandler, he was at some sort of commission, and they were going to cut some funding from... I'm not sure. Here's an article. April 7th, 1988, racial remark by Happy Chandler stirs up students. University of Kentucky students upset over a racial slur by former baseball commissioner Albert Benjamin So AB, Happy Chandler, called Wednesday for an apology for his resignation on the Board of Trustees. So Albert Benjamin Chandler was on the Board of Trustees. Albert Benjamin is a two-time Kentucky governor and a U.S. senator, and he was commissioner in 1947 when Jackie Robinson broke baseball's color barrier. And he made the remark Tuesday during a committee's discussion of the university's 1985 decision to dispose of its investments in South Africa. The statement, the quote that he got in trouble with, he says, "You know, Zimbabwe's all nigger now. There aren't any whites," Chandler said during a meeting of the investments committee. About one-third of the 20 board members were present. So one-third, about 6 or 7 of the board members were actually there for this discussion. Chandler says they're trying to make a mountain out of a molehill, he says Wednesday, and that he doesn't plan to apologize unless asked to do so by the university president, David Rossell, or Governor Wallace Wilkinson. About 40 students representing 6 organizations marched to the administration building to meet with Rossell, one carrying a placard saying, "Hopefully happy is sad," and others shouted, "We want to know," because they wanted to know the reason for Chandler's remark. Rossell, the president of the university, told the students that the university would completely and totally repudiate what it is Governor Chandler says it completely does. So the president of the UK was against what it was ex-governor, but I guess they still call him governor after they're not governor no more. But he was against what Happy Chandler had said. To what we want to have to be the belief of the University of Kentucky. In a telephone interview from his Versailles, I don't know, Kentucky home, Chandler says, "I don't think I should be censored for this. I don't think I deserve any harsh treatment." Chandler said that while he was growing up in Henderson County, there were 400 whites and 400 blacks. We called them niggers and they didn't mind. We loved each other and we never had any trouble. So that was what Happy Chandler says in defense of what he was trying to say. Wilkinson, who was governor at the time, who appointed Chandler to a voting position on the university's governing board earlier this year, said that Chandler should apologize. It was a bad statement, and it was a statement that should have never been made, Wilkinson said, and I'm going to recommend to him that he apologize and explain it. So April 8th, the next day, he did apologize for the remark, for the racial slur, but he also didn't think that he should resign from the Board of Trustees. Kentucky's football team halted spring drills for a day to protest Chandler's remark. The team will resume practice today and will participate in a rally calling for Chandler's resignation. So even the football players were in on this protest in the 80s, in the late 80s. So UK, there was an active movement going on at UK, which is always exciting to hear about in Kentucky. So Chandler, 89, he was 89 years old. He denied that he was a racist. He's like, "I'm not a racist," right? Even though he said, yeah, he basically is calling all black people N-word, right? Just all black people to him. That's what he thought of them. And he says that his record on race relations should be enough to convince anyone of his concern for minorities. Chandler, a two-time U.S. senator, pointed out to his 1947 decision. So this is 1988, and he's like, "I'm not a racist. 41 years ago, I let Jackie Robinson play in the major leagues, help him break the color barrier." And he's like, "I don't reckon there's anybody in this lifetime has made any greater contribution to race relations and good feelings between black and white people than your humble servant. And I think the record will show that," Chandler said at a news conference. So I guess Chandler's saying that he's actually been good for race relations. The remark that touched off the Fuhrer, like fucking Hitler, Fuhrer? Nah, Fuhrer, like hatred. Was made Tuesday when Chandler was attending an investments committee meeting of the University of Kentucky Board of Trustees. He says, "You know, Zimbabwe's all nigger now. There aren't any whites." The comment prompted a storm of protests, including the football team's action. And the team's spokesman, Dave Johnson, a defensive back from Louisville, says he doesn't realize that this is the 80s. This is 1988. We don't like to be called that anymore. I mean, we never did like being called that. That term is not acceptable. Players said they may not participate in the spring games scheduled for April 16th unless Chandler is off the board. So, I'm not sure exactly how that went, but Happy Chandler, he's a fucking racist. I guess he started out good, right? He started out fighting the coal companies for poor people, but it turns out that he grew up and he says that in Montgomery County that there's 400 blacks and 400 whites, and the whites just called the blacks niggers, and that's just how he grew up. And then so therefore it should be okay for him to um, continue that designation. He's 89 years old. He was born in 1898, and he's dead now. So I can't hate the man too much. There's a lot of racist people out there, but I don't know. So this is a stupid comment to make. And it's also interesting how the unions are going down, and yeah. So there's more Kentucky history. Happy Chandler and some union information. Peace.